Aloha and welcome everyone to our class on 1031 exchanges, going over what a 1031 exchange is, and then something very special, mining for listings with 1031 exchanges in mind. We are very blessed here at Ho'okele Title and Escrow to have a partner, a mother company like Realogy, and within that company, we have a lot of great companies like Realogy 1031 exchanges. They're here today to go over this class and to teach us a little bit about 1031 exchanges and then a little secret of mining listings out of 1031 exchanges. I'm really humbled to introduce the president of 1031 exchanges, Realogy 1031 Services. So please help me in welcoming Owen Gloat, and he is going to introduce our fine friends today that will be teaching this class. Owen, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much, Gray, for the introduction. As Gray introduced, my name is Owen Gloat, and I am the president of Realogy 1031 Services. Thank you so much for everyone that joined us today. We're excited to go over the 1031 exchange process, and with me today, I have David Gornberg out of New Jersey. He is an attorney on our team that helps lead a lot of these classes and a lot of our 1031 exchanges as well. And then we also have Connor Jackson on this call, coming to you from Denver, Colorado. Connor is one of our senior 1031 exchange advisors. And collectively here, we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the basics of 1031 exchanges, and then of course, how to really mine for those hidden listings. So with that, I want to go ahead and pass it over to Connor to go ahead and start us out.
Awesome. Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Gray, and everyone for hosting us. David, are you sharing your screen? There we go. Perfect. So yeah, we want to talk to you and spend a little bit of time talking about finding hidden listings and motivating clients with 1031 exchange. Now to start, I'm going to go over some basics of 1031 and then hand it off to David, who's going to actually talk about how to mine these hidden listings and find new avenues or clients that could be 1031 exchange investors to get you some more business here moving forward. David, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So a little bit of background here. So Realogy 1031 has been around for 20 years. And what we are is a qualified intermediary. So we are that third party that's involved in 1031 exchanges. And we actually help create the documentation for the 1031 exchange and hold the funds from between the sale through the close of the purchase. And not only that, but we also advise on a lot of 1031 exchange issues and questions. So getting us involved as early as possible. If someone is planning to list a property in the future, or they are under contract and you find out that it's a investment property, let's talk and let's see if a 1031 exchange is a good bet for them. We can give an overview of the process, talk through a couple different directions they could go, and then figure out if it's the best route to go, and they can have that conversation with their tax advisor as well. Another thing about us is we take pride in having great customer satisfaction and client service. And we actually use a software called Exchange Manager, which allows for us to do everything electronically. So we don't have to be there in person. We can actually get exchange documents signed and automatically uploaded to our system electronically. And then we also provide automated notifications of when funds are received, when the 45-day deadline and the 180-day deadline are coming up. So nothing really gets lost or slips through the cracks there. We just want to make sure it's as smooth as a process as possible here. So a little bit of understanding of what 1031 exchange is, and this is straight out of the Internal Revenue Code section 1031. So it states that no gain or loss will be recognized if a property that's held for investment or productive use in a trade or business is sold and purchased and replaced with a property that is also for investment or business use. Now, this has to be done within 180 days. You're using a qualified intermediary. And essentially what that means is that it can't be a primary residence or a personal use property. So no primary homes, second homes, sometimes vacation homes will qualify, but again, it depends on the primary use. So in that case, you would want to make sure you're not using it more than 14 days per year or 10% of the days you've rented it out in the past 12 months, whichever is more. And last thing to note on this is that it's a tax deferral. So it's not tax-free transaction. So when you do a 1031 exchange, you are deferring those taxes until eventually down the line when you may sell and cash out. At that point, you would be paying those deferred taxes. But the thought along the way is that because you're doing a 1031 exchange, you have more buying power to get into better properties or split it up and leverage up, and you can get more rental income along the way. So even though in the end, if you decide to cash out and pay the taxes, you still come out on top. So a little bit more into the basics here. Now, there is a difference between an exchange versus a purchase and sale. So with an exchange, again, you're using a qualified intermediary. There are time limits. So it has to be completed within 180 days of the first closing and identify properties by the 45th day. Now, with a sale and a purchase without an exchange, you're just selling that property and you're taking those funds. You're getting what we call constructive receipt of funds. And at that point, you're paying the taxes on your gain and you don't have a time limit where you need to go reinvest the remaining post-tax funds. You can do so however you like to, but again, with an exchange, you're able to defer those and have much more cash available to go make that purchase. Now, business or investment property, we've been over this, but just to recap, for a 1031 exchange, it's solely for real property held for investment or productive use in a trade or business. So no primary residence, no second home, has to be something that you're filing as investment. And that has to be the intent and proven intent on both sides of the transaction. Now, timelines, I briefly touched on this a second ago, but there's 180 days. So from the day that you close on your sale, you have 180 days to close on a purchase or multiple purchases in order to use up your exchange value and get the most out of your 1031 exchange. Within that 180 days, the 45th day is that cutoff to identify potential replacement properties. So 45 days after you close on your sale, you have to submit an identification form to the qualified intermediary to let them know which properties you may intend to purchase. And after that 45 days passes, those are locked in and you can only use your proceeds to purchase a property from that list. So the 45th day is actually very crucial. And we highly advise not even waiting until the close of the sale to start looking so that you can buy yourself more than just those 45 days. So if you start looking right as you get under contract for a sale, then you have potentially an extra 30 to 60 days to start looking and making offers and getting under contract for your purchase. And then that way, if you line them up on the closing dates where you close on your sale and a week later close on your purchase, your exchange is completed quickly. You don't have to worry about any of those deadlines. And I call that a success right there. Now, exchanging equal and up. This is for a complete tax deferral. So when we think about tax deferrals, we're talking about capital gains, federal and state taxes combined, depreciation recapture, which is where you are depreciating the asset over the course of your ownership, and the government wants 25% of that depreciation paid back in taxes if you sell and cash out. And then there's also a net investment income tax. If you are a high income earner, that is an additional 3.8%. So exchanging equal or greater in value, you can actually get a complete deferral of all of those taxes by purchasing of new property or multiple properties that add up to equal or greater in value of your sale price. Now, that's not a make or break thing for your exchange. If you find a property that you are extremely interested in, that you love, that is a little bit less than what you sold for, you should still be able to make a 1031 exchange work. And we call that a partial tax deferral. So you'll still get taxes deferred, but that difference between what you've actually purchased at versus what your property sold at before, that's going to be a taxable amount. We call that taxable boot. And then no constructive receipt. So this goes back to the difference between an exchange and a purchase versus sale. For an exchange, you cannot have constructive receipt of funds at all. That is why it's important to get this set up prior to closing on your sale so that you can assign the rights of the contract to the qualified intermediary and they can receive the funds to hold on to it for you. Now, once you've closed on a property and you've touched those funds, or it's even the next day after you've closed, it's too late at that point to start a new exchange, essentially. So it's important to get us involved as early as possible. Now with 1031 exchange, there's what we call like-kind property, and it's confusing to some because you'd think by the name that if you sold a condo, you'd have to go purchase another condo for a similar price, same location, like-kind. But really what like-kind means, again, is just property that's going to be held for investment or productive use in a trade or business. So you could sell that condo, you could go purchase raw land, you could purchase agricultural land, you could purchase a commercial building or an industrial building. And it's a wide range of options there. And not only can you go purchase those, but you could also purchase a tenants in common interest in those shares. What's really important is that it's a real estate property for investment and that it's the same taxpayer from the sale through the purchase. And that's going to, those two things will help you get a successful exchange. Now, how does 1031 benefit investors? You get to preserve your equity. You don't actually have to pay those taxes right then at the sale. You can defer those and put those into a new property, and leverage as well. So if you've got a $600,000 gain and you owe $200,000 in taxes, if you weren't doing an exchange, you could do an exchange and have $200,000 more of buying power that you could then use to leverage up. You could split that into multiple properties and take on debt on all of those properties so that you can get more rental income coming in your way. Diversification and consolidation. So you can do exchanges across all 50 states, and we're able to work in all 50 states. So if you're selling one property and you want to diversify into different types of real estate in different locations, you could sell one property and purchase multiple. If you're tired of managing properties all over the country or all over the state and you just want something really close to home that's easier to manage, you could sell those properties and consolidate into one or two that are closer to home. So a lot of benefits there, in just this sole management purpose of your properties, but estate planning as well. So some people don't understand that 1031 can be a great estate planning tool. So you can continue to do 1031 exchange and defer your taxes and at the end hold on to that property. And when you are to pass away, your heirs can actually inherit that property at a stepped up basis, which means that the day they inherit that property, the value is the market value of that day. So if they were to sell same day or the next day, they could sell and not owe those taxes that you've been deferring your entire life. And it's important to note that that's how the rules are right now. Who's to say if something will be proposed and changed down the line in the tax code, but something that a lot of people are utilizing at this point. Now, how is 1031 exchange and learning about it beneficial for real estate professionals? And the most obvious one is not only are you helping a customer sell their property, but you're also helping them go to find that new replacement property. So you get both ends of the deal. That's twice as much commission there. Also, some people will want to sell one property and again, split up and diversify into multiple properties and lever up on those. So you're getting a lot of deals and the potentials for a lot of closed properties. Not only that, but if you're able to find a seller and buyer who are looking for investment properties and connect them, or if you're helping your buyer go and look out and you find a investment property, you could try to convince that seller to do a 1031 exchange of their own and get that other side of their deal as well. So a lot of benefits and opportunity for more money in your pocket and to create more value for your clients and help them defer taxes, maybe if they don't even know about 1031 exchange. And from here, I'm actually going to let David now talk about how you can mine for these opportunities so that you can not only help your current clients, but find future ones as well and continue to grow your business.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Connor. I just want to touch on and reiterate a couple of points that Connor made because they're really worth driving home. When customers will often say, you know, why would I want to consider doing a 1031 exchange? Well, you're not going to do a 1031 exchange just to do one. You're going to have an underlying motivation for selling the first property. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that, and this is something that will come up in the future, in the further conversation, some customers don't sell their existing property because they're unaware of Section 1031 exchanges. They are aware that there's capital gains tax if they sell their property. So their property, they may have held this same rental property for 10 or 15 or 20 years, not knowing that they could relocate it to another side of the county, in your case, one of the other islands, or elsewhere in the country, if you so choose to leave the warm tropical paradise of Hawaii and come to the land of four seasons like New Jersey, which is far more attractive than the late night comics would have you believe. But the point is that anytime a client has the opportunity or a customer has an opportunity to sell a property, this is something that they should be considering. There is, along the New Jersey shore, there are a number of real estate offices that have walls of keys for rental properties nearby. And I was in one of them last summer speaking to one of the agents I work with. I said, how many of these keys have been here with the same owner for years? And his answer was almost all of them, because those customers, those potential customers, aren't thinking about the possibility of selling that property to perhaps diversify into two or more, or relocate to a different part of the community, or upgrade to a newer, shinier, more expensive to rent property. So that's something to keep in mind. Connor also mentioned that it's worth repeating. Like kind does not mean condo for condo, single family for single family. Real estate is real estate is real estate is real estate. So we can sell a condominium and we can buy a duplex, and we can sell a duplex and we can buy a shopping center. We can sell a shopping center and buy a golf course. We can sell a golf course and buy an office building. As long as it's real estate, it works. And then finally, before we move into the uncovering hidden listings thing, I want to talk about the estate planning issue. I had a real life transaction very early in my career that I think illustrates this point very clearly. Grandpa was meeting with a new estate planning attorney because his prior attorney had retired. And during the course of the conversation, it became apparent that Grandpa owned a shopping center and he was leaving the shopping center to his 4 grandchildren. And the attorney suggested that leaving one asset, it wasn't a huge shopping center, it was a little strip mall, leaving one asset to 4 grandchildren was a recipe for family infighting that would likely make Grandpa roll over in his grave. One person would want to sell the shopping center. Maybe one would want to refinance it to remodel and upgrade it. Maybe another one would want to refinance it to pull out some equity so they could go on a vacation. And maybe the fourth one was out partying someplace and you couldn't get him to agree what time of day it is, let alone what we should do with the property. So the estate planning attorney suggested that the Grandpa sell the small shopping center, and Grandpa ultimately found 4 identical corner unit condominiums about a block from the main gate of Penn State University. So he effectively bought student housing. Each condo was going to go to a different grandchild. And now when grandpa ultimately passes, Billy gets his and Rachel gets hers and Sarah gets hers and so forth. And each can do what they wish with their property. If they wish to sell it, they can. They will have inherited the property at a stepped up basis. So there's no capital gains tax. There's no depreciation recapture tax. There may be estate taxes or inheritance taxes, different issue. But the capital gain and depreciation recapture that grandpa was avoiding go away. So there's a prime example of estate planning. Now, moving on. One of the things that I like to point out in this seminar, and if I'm wrong as to this group, I'm happy to be corrected. But one of the things I've noticed over the years is that many real estate agents tend to do things the way their mentor did them, who did it the same way as their mentor did it. And there's some evolution with time because there are different tools and such. But many real estate agents have the same basic marketing strategy as the others. So how do you differentiate yourself? Well, you start by aligning with a quality organization, which you have done. But the other is to start thinking outside of the box and not necessarily do the same kinds of marketing that everybody else would consider doing. So one of the things that we see is that typical opportunity here, or the typical listings that you would see in homeowners relocating, somebody's coming from, like I said, the land of four seasons, New Jersey, and they want to retire to the tropical climates of Hawaii. So there's a wonderful listing, right? Somebody here is going to get the listing to sell my property. And then when I show up there, one of you is going to help me find a new tropical paradise to live in. There's one way that people might get commissions. Maybe I've had a successful career and it's time for me to move into a slightly larger home or a substantially larger home. And whether it's a McMansion or a custom built something someplace, that would be something to consider. Or maybe you have a penchant for working with empty nesters. You're an SRES and folks whose children are all out of the house and they want to downsize and live in maybe a 55 and over community or a golf or tennis community. Or you should be lucky enough to want somebody who wants to live in an airport community. The first time I saw an airport community, I was flabbergasted that people have their own private hangars out the backyard of their homes, which tacks you right onto the runway. And that to me is a whole new level of living. So those were the typical listings, but what are atypical listings? Well, atypical listings, in my humble opinion, are the ones that people aren't looking for, the 1031 exchange opportunities. One of the things that you can do with Ho'okele, and if I get that wrong, I apologize. But one of the things that you can do with Ho'okele is you can say, you know what, Gray, can you run a search for me in this particular zip code for anybody who owns two homes, two properties? Or can you run a search for me in this zip code for anybody who, or for any property where the tax bill is going someplace else? Well, if the tax bill is going someplace else, that tells me anyway that the owner doesn't live there, or probably doesn't live there. It's not 100%, but it's more likely than not, if the tax bill is going someplace else, that the owner lives someplace else, which means that this property might be a great potential 1031 exchange. Maybe you can mine other data and find properties that fit those criteria, but maybe the last time a transaction took place was perhaps 5 years or more in history. Why would that be important? Well, if the person's owned the property 4, 5, 6, 7 years or longer, we can pretty much safely assume that there is some substantial gain in the property. Of course, in this market, if they've owned the property a year, there's probably some substantial gain in the property, but that's sort of an anomaly that it doesn't typically last for an extended period of time. So there's some starting points. So one of the things that I like to suggest is that we all stop thinking inside the box and forget, in fact, don't even think outside the box, just forget the box. Come up with ways to differentiate yourself. Whether it's a newsletter, whether it's participating on a talk show, whether it's bringing folks together. Here's an example. I used to do some work with a particular real estate agent who has now since retired, God bless him. He would bring together folks at a local country club on a Sunday morning, and there would be him, a title agent, a mortgage broker, and me. And we would each speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm happy to come to your office, but I need to be able to speak for more than 10 or 15 minutes because I'm in New Jersey and you're not. But in any event, so in between each of the folks speaking for 10 or 15 minutes, this real estate agent would give some data about what's going on in the local market, what's going on in the local communities, new developments that might be happening. And all of this was at the local country club. And it was just a continental breakfast. It was nothing fancy, but he invited all of these prospects to these meetings. And I don't know what he spent on them, but he must have gotten a wonderful ROI because we did this once a quarter for about 2.5 years. And I can't imagine somebody doing this, that kind of a project 6 or 8 or 10 times if it wasn't paying off. So there's something that you can do that would help you stand out from the crowd, which comes into the next place, the next point. Position yourself. I mentioned earlier SRES, the Senior Real Estate Specialist, I believe is what the acronym stands for. And there's SIOR and CCIM and a whole host of other acronyms and more accurately certifications that you can obtain through NAR and through the local Realtor Association. Start learning more about real estate investment. Analyzing a property for investment purposes is not the same as analyzing a property for whether it's a good home for me. If I want a new primary residence, you might ask things about, do I have children? Do I want to be near the schools? All kinds of other things, recognizing that there are fair housing restrictions on some of the things you say and you can and cannot say, but you're going to want to find out what will be my primary desires for this home. What features would I be looking for? And I'll tell you, well, I'd really like something that's all on one floor. I don't want to walk up and down steps anymore. I don't need to be on a golf course, but I'd like to be within 15 or 20 minutes of a golf course. I don't need to be walking distance to a house of worship, but I'd like to be within 10 or 15 minutes of a house of worship, whatever my points might be. I don't need to be within walking distance of the public schools, but I'd like to be close, those kinds of things. So now you'll help narrow things down. Well, that's different. In helping clients analyze investment properties, you're going to need to be able to understand how to calculate what their return on investment would be and what their return on equity would be. So if I'm buying a $300,000 house and it rents for X, but if I buy a $600,000 house, will it rent for 2X? Because if I'm spending twice as much, I want to be able to recover at least twice as much in my monthly cash flow. So being able to understand real estate investment property analysis is wonderful. I teach a sort of consolidated version of a course that CCIM teaches, but if you really want to understand real estate investing, CCIM, if you take just their intro class, just that one class, you don't have to go all the way through to be a CCIM unless you want to be a commercial real estate specialist, that's fine. But if you want to be able to truly position yourself as somebody who can analyze investment real estate, the CCIM intro class is awesome. My little consolidated version takes their 6-hour class and turns it into 60 minutes. So you do the math, figure out where you think the best return on your investment would be for education. So there's that. The next thing, how are we going to find the investors? Well, I mentioned earlier asking Gray, hey, Gray, can you do a search for me in zip code 98765 for properties where the tax bill goes someplace else? There's a wonderful way to do so. You might also consider that there are, in many communities, real estate investment clubs. Some of them are local only, some of them are affiliated as part of a national organization. You can typically show up to your first one or two of these events as a guest at no charge, just to see if you're going to, if you can foresee a return on your time investment there. The local club here was very good to me early in my career. It was a wonderful way to jumpstart my ability to communicate with the real estate investors. At this point in my career, I don't need to go there anymore. But somebody who's starting out might want to do so, or somebody who's starting out with the real estate investors might want to do so. Change your marketing. I can't tell you how many postcards I get in any week or any month from a real estate agent, or from how many different real estate agents. Let me show you the comps in your community. These homes sold in your neighborhood. That's all wonderful. They're all telling me the same thing. Maybe tell me about how you work with real estate investors in the area, because that might be the person who I want to go to when I'm ready to sell my investment property. So those are some ideas on how to find some investors. And by the way, when this session is over today, Connor and I don't disappear. We're here for you beyond this. And if you want to schedule some time for some one-on-one to either go over the 1031 exchange details or the hidden listings details, happy to respond to your email and set something up that is at a mutually convenient time. Okay, so now we get into the fishing. Where are we going to go fishing? If you take all of what I've said in the first 3 steps and you kind of compile them together, do you want to go out on a small fishing boat, and go 10 miles offshore? Or would you rather go into a large lake that you know has been stocked with fish? Personally, I'd rather be on the large lake where I know it's stocked, because I know they're all here. It's a lake. They're kind of stuck here. They can't go anywhere. If I go out into the ocean, maybe the fish were here an hour ago, but a shark swam through and all the fish moved 2 miles in the other direction. I'm not a deep sea fisherman, so if my analogy isn't entirely accurate, I apologize. But I think you understand the point I'm trying to make. You need to go where the investors are. Not only a place like a real estate investment club, but in my experience, many investors tend to be wealthy. Not all, many tend to be wealthy. So maybe start considering a membership at a country club, or some variation, a tennis club, a golf club, whatever it may be, where you might have the opportunity to strike up casual conversations with folks who are real estate investors. I'll give you an example that is so completely off the wall that you may laugh. My wife is very active in the local high school marching band. She's an assistant director. And I go with her every weekend, whether it's Friday or Saturday, and I help move equipment from the school to the truck, from the truck to the field, from the field back to the truck, back to the school. By the end of the season, almost every parent who has attended a game knows that I help people with 1031 exchanges. About every other year, I get a phone call. Personally, if I was giving up 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday afternoon or a Friday night, I was spending the time with my wife anyway, so it wasn't a burden. And to now get a deal a year or a deal every other year for doing something that I was going to do anyway, it's fantastic return on my time. My opinion. Now, how are you going to approach these people? Well, again, newsletters or mailings that are specifically targeted to investors, as opposed to somebody who might be looking to buy a first home or upgrade to a bigger home or downsize to a smaller home or relocate to a 55 and over community. Newsletters, participating in talk shows on the radio station or an article in the local newspaper. I did that for a couple of years, also early in my 1031 career. The local newspaper, I wrote little stories that were typically around 500 or 600 words, and you can bang that out in no time. Just, it was Q&A type stuff about 1031 exchanges. So you could do Q&A about 1031 exchanges or about real estate investing in general, those kinds of things that help you stand out from every other broker at every other broker, from every other agent at every other brokerage on the island, can really help you go far. And it doesn't take a lot of time and it doesn't take a lot of money. Certainly you can spend the time, more time and more money. It just depends on how you want to reposition yourself. I did work with one woman. So all these people are retiring. I should probably get the message here. I worked with another woman a few years ago, a bunch of years ago now, who transitioned most of her practice to working with real estate investors. And she was having a ball. We were doing a couple of exchanges a month, and she really got to be quite proficient in working with real estate investors, which brings up a point. I specifically chose the words working with real estate investors as opposed to advising real estate investors. I don't think you need to become a 1031 exchange expert. Being conversant in 1031 exchange versus being fluent in 1031 exchange. Okay, you can hold a conversation is wonderful. You don't have to be the person who's going to stand up in the front of a room of 300 of your closest friends and give a 3-hour seminar. You don't have to do that. In fact, you probably shouldn't be that person. Constrain yourself to doing what your real estate license suggests you do, and know when to call Connor or me or someone else from the team to help participate, to help guide your client. Moving on. So here we go back to the seminar. I mentioned earlier the gentleman with the country club on Sunday mornings. Whether it's that, whether it's newsletters, whether it's participating in a class at the local community college or at the high school or some kind of a seminar like that, at its core, real estate sales really is education. Excuse me. So educating our clients on the relative pros and cons, merits or lack of merits of any one property over another is a big part of what we do. When it comes to investing, the more you understand about investment strategy, about return on investment, return on equity, two very different concepts, and cash flow that a property might be able to generate. Should the client be buying the property all cash? Should they have leverage? How much can the property rent for? I've seen some taxpayers make very big mistakes buying beautiful properties that they thought would generate really nice cash flow, but they didn't. They failed to fully inform themselves. They failed to fully ask all of the questions of the real estate agent. Will people rent in this community? Because just because it's a nice neighborhood doesn't mean people will rent there. Maybe people who can afford to live there want to own, for example, unless it's something like an Airbnb type property or a seasonal rental along the beach kind of a property. Those kinds of things might be different, but being able to educate. Now, the other thing for you folks to consider is maybe some of your marketing is not directly on the island. Maybe you reach out to folks from California who might want to consider coming to the island. I don't know how that plays with your license. I'm not advising you to do that. I'm suggesting that you can inquire as to whether you can reach out to folks, for example, in San Francisco and say, hey, consider coming to Hawaii. I can help you with this property. Again, I don't know if that's permitted under your license. That's something you'll have to take up with your broker. Moving on, once you have worked, I want to step back for a moment. There's a very important thing, a very important strategy that I almost forgotten. Gray somebody touched on it earlier. Maybe it was Connor, I don't recall. You're sitting at a closing table representing a buyer, and you know for a fact that the property that your buyer is buying was used as a rental. But it's not a 1031 exchange. So you look across the table, and I'm sorry, Gerald, I'm going to pick on you for a moment because your name is right there in the center of my screen. You look across the table and you say, Gerald, I'm curious. Is there a reason why your client isn't structuring this transaction as a 1031 exchange? And Gerald, not being as informed as the rest of us, just kind of, and no, it just never came up. And he'll come up with some excuse. So now Gerald's client's going to look at Gerald and say, what is this 1031 exchange that he's talking about? And Gerald's going to have to backpedal and do some quick advising on what a 1031 exchange is. And by the way, Gerald, if this happens, and I hope I'm sure it won't, but for everybody here, if that kind of a situation comes up, while we're not fond of this, you can call us from the closing table and we can make it work. 95 times out of 100, we can make it work. I wouldn't suggest that you do that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the last business day of the month, because it will be difficult. But almost any other time, we can probably make it work. So our hypothetical, Gerald, now explains this to the client, and the client says, well, I want to do a 1031 exchange. Let's do this. This sounds wonderful. And Gerald picks up the phone and calls Connor, and Connor says, that's great. And send me over the draft settlement statement, send me over the title report, send me over the contract. I'll have papers at the closing table in 10 minutes, maybe 15. Wonderful. Closing goes through, the title company changes the closing statement. Gray and his team change the closing statement. And now the funds get sent to Realogy 1031 instead of going directly to the client. Everybody shakes hand and leaves the closing table. And what happens? That seller, instead of calling Gerald, who just helped them get through this particular sale, that seller will now call you, because you were the guru who brought up the idea of a 1031 exchange, and literally at the 11th hour saved them a boatload of money. And again, Gerald, I'm sorry I picked on you. Your name happened to be right there in the center of the screen, so you were the lucky victim today. So that kind of a situation comes up periodically, not often, but pay attention to it. And notice that in my example, I pointed out that you looked across the table to the other broker, not to the client, right? Because you don't want to talk to their client, you want to talk directly to them. So Gerald, why isn't your client doing the 1031 exchange, or why didn't your? And in fact, there may be good reasons why they chose not to do a 1031 exchange, different story. And they may explain it away and say, no, we don't want to. We're taking this money to pay off the last of my son's medical school debt, or whatever the answer might be. And that's a wonderful answer. But you've now raised the idea that you are a superior broker to the one who was sitting across the table from you. So there's a way for you to gain some loyalty from that other broker that didn't exist before. And if this person happens to have other investment properties, you know who they're calling the next one sells, right? They're not going to call Gerald, they'll call you. Now, once you've, excuse me, once you have helped your client get through their first 1031 exchange, keeping them up to date on market conditions is huge. There are several brokers with whom I work on a regular basis who send newsletters that are talking about market conditions, interest rates, trends in the community. That commercial brokers are awesome with this kind of thing, but even some of the local residential brokers who work a lot with investors, I'm seeing send out these kind of newsletters. Hey, the rents are up in this community. This town just updated their certificate of occupancy requirements. This has to happen, that has to happen. So those kinds of updates say, oh, well, okay, I've now determined that I don't want to invest in Riverside, New Jersey, because getting a certificate of occupancy there is more difficult than getting one in Maple Shade, New Jersey, for example, 2 towns away. Those kinds of updates, again, help you stand out from the rest of the crowd as to the investor clients. So how have you now helped them? You have helped them by structuring their transaction to avoid capital gains taxes in the short term and perhaps forever. You help them reposition themselves from okay investments to better investments. You've helped them with their estate planning strategy as far as the 1 shopping center to the 4 condos for the grandchildren kind of idea. And all of those other advantages that Connor spoke about early in the session. And I can almost guarantee you that their CPA never discussed any of this with them. Why? Because to the CPA, a 1031 exchange is 1 more form to fill out, 10 more lines of calculations to complete, and another task to keep track of the adjusted basis along the way. So now that you've helped them, how will they help you? Loyalty, more referrals, better referrals, and they will become truly valuable clients over the course of the rest of your career. That's all I have to say on that. I think we still have plenty of time for some questions.
Wow, that's really great info. There was a question. All of this has been incredibly great information, especially the last part with the 1031 and the mining and how to bring more business from 1031 exchanges. But one of the first questions that we got back at the beginning was an agent asking from some of the basics. They are able to find a property for a new property that they're going to acquire before selling their previous property. So they can have their clients out and get into a contract beforehand, before the closing of their property. Is that what we understood from that?
Connor, you want that
Yes. Yep. So there's no rule that states that you have to wait until you close on your sale to get out there and look for replacement properties or get under contract. You can certainly get under contract for those replacement properties ahead of closing on your sale, and then line up the closing dates so that you close on the sale first, purchase second. There's also cases where, the way the market is kind of difficult. Some people don't feel confident that after they sell, they can go find a new replacement property and identify within 45 days. So what they'll do is actually get under contract and have a closing date to purchase a property before they close on their sale. And we call that a reverse exchange. And we can actually make that work. I think that's something to get into in a different time, but it's a little bit more of a complex process, but we can park that property and hold title to it so they have 180 days to sell their property afterwards. So you can definitely get under contract on either side, at any time, essentially.
Great answer. Thank you so much on that answer. Let's see, do we have any other questions? God, all this information was so good.
While we're waiting to see if anybody else has any questions, something that will eventually come up is, what does a 1031 exchange cost?
Mhm.
And if you look at most settlement statements, except for like wire fees and FedEx, that kind of stuff, a 1031 exchange is almost always the lowest professional cost on a closing statement. We're lower than the title charges, we're lower than the brokerage fees, we're lower than the attorney fees. Most 1031 exchanges can be completed for between $1,100 and $1,500. For one simple sale to one simple purchase, most exchanges are between $1,100 and $1,500 to save 20 or 30% in taxes.
Nice. We had a general question come in concerning our Maui market. And the question was, are there investment clubs to join in Maui that you know of? And gentlemen, I'll answer this. The answer is yes. Maui actually has one of the biggest national investors that lives right on Maui. He has an investment club. His name is Beardy Brandon Turnin from Bigger Pockets. You're more than welcome to look him up, reach out, and that is an investment club that's quite large on Maui. So I hope that answers that question for them.
And Bigger Pockets is a good resource for some learning as well.
Mhm.
Maui, it seems to be a place where a lot of outside investors want to invest in. It's a good place. We're very blessed here on Big Island and across the state to really have some investors that kind of move in here. Well, I wanted to follow up, and before I say how thankful we are that that you came, we're still getting a couple more questions. Let me go over that. Are there stricter requirements for people who apply for a mortgage with a 1031 exchange?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say stricter requirements, but a cautionary tale. Remember, 1031 exchange applies to business and investment properties. So you're telling the IRS that the property that we just sold is an investment property and the property that we just bought is an investment property. You should not tell the lender that it's going to be a primary home or a secondary home, because that is not an investment property. And the inclination at the customer's side would be to tell them that it's going to be a primary or a secondary to get a lower mortgage rate, especially now that rates are ticking back up. But in the unlikely event of an audit, now you have a mortgage application that says that you told ABC Bank it's my second home, but you have an IRS document that says this was an investment property. So to whom did we lie? Did we lie to the lender or did we lie to the IRS? Keeping in mind that lying to either of them effectively is a felony.
Great. And we'll leave that chat box open. You can also unmute yourself if you do have a question and want to chime in. But in the meantime, I wanted to circle back and say thank you so much for all of the tips that we did about finding the investors. And we at Ho'okele, I mean, you're absolutely right. We can pull the absentee owners, where they own in our city or state and live out of state or out of the county. And then we can also pull people that own more than 2 or 3 properties, kind of circle onto that investor side. So thank you for bringing that up, and we thank you on that. So we have I think this is going to be an interesting question coming in. So a quick question regarding the grandfather with the shopping mall. So let's see what Bobby follows up on that one. Bobby has us waiting on winded wings, if you will.
Does somebody need to unmute to ask the question? Is that what we're waiting for?
Oh my
Yeah,
God, that's
Bobby.
such a great idea. Thank you. So sorry. I got so thank you, David. You were discussing the example of the shopping mall, and you had run through really quickly, you had just identified 3 or 4 specific tax kind of approaches. And I know you're not a tax advisor, and I'm not taking this as any tax advice. However, you did identify 3 or 4 things. One was levering up. You used three or four specific terms as it pertained to tax situation that I thought were very useful for me to get a little greater handle on. Do you recall what those were?
I think actually Connor was talking about the leverage and such, but there's leverage. There's also the step up in basis.
Yep.
Right. So when grandpa dies, his heirs inherit the property at a stepped up basis, the fair market value as of the date of his death. Right.
Yep.
And as part of that, the capital gains tax that would have been due if grandpa sold the day before, and the depreciation recapture tax that would have been due if grandpa sold the day before, become deferred. Now here's something interesting. If grandpa, and I'll just say this real quickly, if grandpa starts the 1031 exchange and then dies in the middle of the exchange, his estate can complete the exchange, which then allows the heirs to inherit the properties that the estate bought, as if grandpa had completed the exchange.
Wow, that's a pretty great advantage.
So-
But the process needs to have been initiated, correct?
Correct. And
Yeah.
this comes up in our office a couple of times a year, where grandpa or Uncle Joe or whomever, or Aunt Sally, whoever it might be, sold the relinquished property. We're, partway into the exchange period, and oh my goodness, the taxpayer didn't wake up the next morning. And it's sad and it's difficult for the family. But once they get through the initial grieving period and they recognize that they still have this powerful tax tool that they can work with, it becomes an immense tax savings play for them.
That's great. Could you identify that term? You said the depreciation.
Depreciation recapture.
Recapture. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So what that means is that when you own investment property, the IRS says that you depreciate the property during the term of your ownership.
Right.
Residential real estate depreciates over 27 and a half years. So you take the value of the property and divide it by 27.5. Commercial property depreciates over 39 years. And then when you sell the property, absent a 1031 exchange, you pay back 25% of the accumulated depreciation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
And gentlemen, we had another private, more advanced question as well. So please let us know if this is for a tax lawyer. But let's say you purchased a property as a 1031 and rented it out for years. However, then you moved into it as an owner-occupied property. When you eventually sell the property, are your capital gains absorbed and you qualify for the homeowner exemption?
So it's sort of a mixed answer. You've rented it out for a whole bunch of years. You then move into it. The homeowner exemption, remember, means that you need to have lived there for any 2 of the preceding 5 years. So in this example, we'll assume that the person has lived there for 2 years and a day or more. At that point in time, yes, they are entitled to the Section 121 homestead exclusion. But during the second Bush presidency, Bush younger, there was an amendment to Section 121. It says that if you bought the property as part of a 1031 exchange, your 121 exclusion, this is sort of paraphrasing the change in the rule, your 121 exclusion now becomes a fraction of the amount of time over which you've owned the property. So let's keep it simple. If I bought the property 10 years ago, and then 2 years ago I moved into it, I can take 2/10 of the gain in that property and shelter it under Section 121. But I can still I may still be able to, let's change it a little bit. I bought the property 13 years ago, 11 years ago. Now let's go back to 10. I bought the property 10 years ago. it's late in the day. I'm in New Jersey. It's late in the day. It's been a long day. I bought the property 10 years ago. 3 years ago, I moved into it. I lived there for 2 years. I moved back out. Now I've rented it for a year. Well, I've rented it again. It's now eligible for Section 1031. But I lived there for 2 of the preceding 5 years. So I'm eligible for 2/10 of the homestead exclusion because I lived there. And the rest of the gain, I would shelter using Section 1031. So that becomes a question. I mean, that's, again, the 30,000-foot paraphrased view, that taxpayer would absolutely be encouraged to speak to their CPA or their tax attorney.
That was a very good explanation of that and broke it down into layman's terms for me. So I appreciate that very much so. And the process of working with you, their CPA then communicates with you through the client, and you can facilitate in every way possible. Is that how that works?
That's correct. Owen, Connor, and I, and the rest of the team, we work with all of the professionals in the transaction. It's open dialogue in all directions. We chime in where it's appropriate, and we keep our mouths shut where it's appropriate.
We enjoy having a partner like that. And one thing that you brought up during the class was the fact that we're able to contact you even late in the game, and you would be able to support us. Now, me personally being in the title and escrow business, I can't tell you how rare that is. So I hope everyone heard that although it's not an ideal situation every time, it's great to have a partner that actually wants to work for us and can even be there if we're coming into the minute or into it in the last minute. So thank you for pointing that out. And that's something that I'm going to continue to tell clients as well. So much appreciated.
Our pleasure.
Well, we've had some really great questions, and I am thoroughly impressed with all of you today. So I wanted to thank you personally, if I can, and say to everyone, thank you so much for joining our class. Gentlemen, do you have any closing out statements?
Connor?
I just want to say thank you guys for joining and having us talk to you about 1031 exchange. We're always happy to answer questions further. So just give us a call or send us an email, and we'll be sure to follow up with a PDF of this slide deck as well. So you guys have something to reference, and then also some more information where you can get more resources tied to 1031 from our website. So thank you again, and I look forward to helping you all out here in the future.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. We look forward to working with you.
And thank you so much, gentlemen. And thank you for all of the agents that came and sat through our class today. Again, Realogy 1031 Services is a partner of Ho Kelly Title and Escrow. We work together to make sure that you are fully up to date for not only your 1031 exchanges, but all of your educational needs. And if you walked away with a little nugget that they're able to share with clients, then today's time was a very big win for your return on investment. So thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you in the future. And I know for a fact that we definitely would like to have everyone back today. Owen, Connor, David, so appreciative, and we look forward to the next class with all of you. So all of our friends at Hui Ho, aloha, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Gray, thank you very much. And Gerald, thank you for being my victim.
You bet.
Enjoy.
Bye, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha.